get to teach, but I also help out with just the discipleship idea of things. And it's funny because the moment I said I was the head of discipleship, people are coming up going, what class are you going to have? I'm like, guys, that's not discipleship. Discipleship in the church is each Christian owning their faith enough to truly pass it down. I mean, it starts with parents, and then it's each of us being very purposeful and going, you know what? I may not be that far ahead of anybody, but I'm a little bit ahead of that person. How can I bring them up to where I'm at? When a church does that, oh, it's incredible. When people own their faith. And I think that's one of the biggest things, especially in today's church, is it's very easy to show up and leave and nothing change. And so it is the call of like, what does it look like to own your faith? Because there's so much more on the other side of it if we actually treat this as more than just an hour on Sunday.
Daryl Black.
Yes, sir.
Traveled the world, spoke on stages in front of thousands of people. I'm assuming dozens, if not hundreds of times. Been on television, America's Got Talent, very accomplished man. Take me back a couple weeks, Easter Sunday, Raymond James Stadium. You're standing on the stage in front of 20,000+ people, worshiping solo. What's going on there? How are you processing that in real time? And what are you feeling and experiencing in that moment?
It was amazing, first of all. And I think we're at 30,000 people, 29.5 or something like that.
Yeah.
And someone asked me before, have you been in front of this many people before? I have. I mean, quite a few times. But it never gets old when everybody's doing it for Jesus. Most of my life, when it was that many people, I was doing R&B and doing that stuff on tour. But there's nothing like when you've got 30,000 people come and we're celebrating Jesus. So that was super exciting to me to look out there and see it. And dude, the position of being on stage, you could see everything. And some of the coolest stuff that I saw is families worshiping together, coming down, dancing together. And not just like young people, old people, grandparents coming with their kids. I think one of the things that really got me really emotional is when we did the invitation. So I'm up there singing, and me and Craig are kind of duoing this invitation, and I see two young men. They're probably 19, 20 years old. They come down together, and then all their friends come and join them, and they're all standing in the front. It's probably like 8 to 10 of them, and they're locked shoulder to shoulder. It's praying for this one guy. Dude, that kind of stuff, I want to do that every weekend. And so if we can figure out a way to do that every weekend, if we can get Raymond James every weekend. But for me, that's why we do what we do. This is why I shouldn't even have a job. But I love that I get called to help people see Jesus. So, man, that was an amazing experience.
Yeah, that first mosh pit, I mean, it was like second, third song in. You see all the kids rushing the crowd.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're sitting probably front row, second row, somewhere up there.
I was up back, yeah. I was just watching the whole thing.
Okay, what's going on in you? How are you kind of processing, man, this is our church. This is God moving here in Tampa Bay. What's going on?
I'll say the thing that hit me during it was just the realization of how big our church is. Because when we teach on Sunday, we're teaching at one location. And Lute's location, it's still, it's over 1,000 people kind of deal. But when you look at all of it, it's like the weight. I felt a lot of the weight. I'm going, man, we're responsible. Like what we say affects a lot of people. And so it was just like it was just a very somber moment for me. I'm just going, oh my gosh, like I am incredibly lucky to be able to do this, to be able to help people, to guide people. And really just so many people are going, we are looking to the pastors, the people on stage to help us navigate this life. And it was an incredible moment. And then being down front, I couldn't see, you were up higher. I couldn't see people coming down. At first, it was just like a couple of people. I'm going, well, this is awesome. This is great. And then they kept coming. And it was like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. And so, yeah, it was a very just sobering moment of, wow, look at what God's doing.
Yeah.
It's not me.
No.
Yeah.
It's humbling. It's humbling,
not,
too, because you go, like, I know me.
Mm-hmm.
And God, did you brought me to this place? And I was thinking about Sermon on the Mount. It's like, is this what this looked like when Jesus is on the Sermon on the Mount and people are they're just waiting. They're hungry to hear what he has. And so there was that sense of, man, this is humbling to be in this position that God is using us to do this. And people are going, man, we want to receive. We want to get saved. We want to get baptized. But all of those things. And God is using little Daryl to be a part of this.
Daryl and his gifts and his talents. Was that mosh pit something that was planned and anticipated? It kind of looked like the stage was maybe set up for it, or was that just
not
by
at all
chance?
No,
okay.
It was by chance. It was, I mean, we set the room up, the space between where the stage is and the chairs are, because we were expecting an invitation for a bunch of people to come down then. But the mosh pit was spontaneous. It was, I don't even know who started it. I just know that they just started running down. I think it was that young energy that they were like, no, we have an opportunity to celebrate Jesus in a way that sometimes we don't get to do it in a church setting. So why wouldn't we go all out? And they came down, and it was awesome.
Yeah.
I'll just say this for those of us that grew up in the 90s and early 2000s that know what a mosh pit is. It was not that kind of mosh pit. There was no half-drunk guy just running through punching people in the face. Like, it was just people coming down. It was incredible. It really was, just seeing them so excited to be a part of what God's doing. So
Yeah. Well, I want to get into a couple things with the two of you here today. You know, we've touched on it a little bit, obviously, before we started recording. You know, maybe talk about some of the art of what you guys do from the stage, and then kind of get into some modern male issues in the church. Before we get into all that, though, let's kind of, you know, unpack each one of your stories here a little bit. So, Hal, we'll kind of start with you, man. Kind of take us back in the early stages of your journey into pastoring. You know, we don't need to go back how shooting hoops in the front yard with dad and stuff like that, but take us as far back as you feel is necessary, and kind of walk us through, you know, what your journey into what you're doing today, the role of pastoring, and kind of the head discipleship pastor here at Grace, and what kind of led you into Grace as well.
Well, I'll take it back to this point. My dad is a pastor. He was first generation Christian. He was a part of leading his dad to Christ. Incredible deal, all that kind of stuff. So I grew up in that, and my personality, and I think Daryl's very similar in this, I'm a contrarian. And so everybody told me I was going to be a pastor. So I was like, no. It was the same thing in the youth group. They're like, you're going to date this girl? I'm like, no. And I would date some other girl just to show them that I wouldn't date that girl. And so I was like, no, I'm going to do that. So I figured I'd run away as far away from ministry as possible. So I went to the University of Florida. And where
He went 10 miles away.
Yeah, that's not there. But then, man, I started just helping out in a church, helping out with a youth group, and felt God calling me to it. It's kind of funny. It happened. I was working down. I worked at Roadway, which is the loading, unloading 18-wheelers one summer. And I just had all this time just walking up and down the docks. I just felt like God's like going, no, this is what you're supposed to do. Like, don't be dumb. Like, don't just run away from something because you don't want to. And then started to head into ministry, and ended up my first church down in West Palm Beach. That's where I met my wife. We got married, and then we came up to Tampa to really help my dad plant a church. And so we were doing that for 10 years, portable church. And so I think it's one of those things. I think people at Grace, a lot of times when we get to come into the buildings that we've got, we don't realize how lucky we are until you have to set up and tear down every week and then be nice to people, which is a lot harder for somebody. I'm an introvert, so that's harder for me. But really walking through that. And I'll say this, I think some of the biggest moments for me in ministry was not in ministry. It was what was just happening in life. For those that have heard the story and stuff, my wife went through a lot in her childhood, sexual abuse, some stuff like that, but never told anybody. And about 5 years into our marriage, that just kind of blew up. And so we walk through that. We walk through the counseling of that, walk through me understanding that I'm not that awesome. And while I can pastor other people, I cannot pastor just my wife through this. So we walked through that. We got to the other side. And then on the other side of that, we had trouble with infertility. Took us about 2.5 years to have our son, Hal. But then after that, the doctor said, you're done. And so we stepped into foster care. And I really do believe, I'll be honest, I think stepping into foster care, stepping into all of this, just changed all of this with my wife, with foster care, all that changed my entire mindset. Because I grew up like hardcore Southern Baptist. And when you grow up hardcore Southern Baptist, it's black and white. It's like you're a sinner and you're following God, or you're not. And so it's very much, you're responsible, and you are responsible for what you do, but not understanding people's walk through things, and really eyes being opened up and all of that as I walk through it. And so I came on at Grace, and I was the youth pastor for a little bit, and then I became the young adults pastor, which was awesome. I love that group. It's just, young adults are just so fun to teach to. They don't send you mean emails about anything that you say. They're perfectly fine with it.
They just ghost you when they're mad at you.
Dude, well, it's funny because I would always it's so funny. The pastor would be like, "Oh, they get triggered so much." I'm like, "No, actually, the most triggered people are the older people that are set in their ways." And you just say one thing that may not even be what they thought you said. there's always somebody that comes up. I can't believe you said that. I'm like, I don't remember saying that, and I just said it 4 times. So, and so walking through that, and then really now just in this position, which is pretty cool, and it's still being formed out where I get to teach, but I also help out with just the discipleship idea of things. And it's funny because the moment I said I was the head of discipleship, people are coming up going, what class are you going to have? I'm like, guys, that's not discipleship. Discipleship in the church is each Christian owning their faith enough to truly pass it down. I mean, it starts with parents, and then it's each of us being very purposeful and going, you know what? I may not be that far ahead of anybody, but I'm a little bit ahead of that person. How can I bring them up to where I'm at? And so when a church does that, oh, it's incredible when people own their faith. And I think that's one of the biggest things, especially in today's church, is people, it's very easy to show up and leave and nothing change. And so it is the call of like, what does it look like to own your faith? Because there's so much more on the other side of it if we actually treat this as more than just an hour on Sunday. And so just getting to do all this, it's kind of funny. I get to speak now, which is awesome. I always told people, like, not everybody saw that. It was one of those things I felt like God was like, this is what you ought to do. And I remember even my dad was like, this is not for you. It was about 4 years ago when he finally went, okay, I can see the speaking gift. I was like, thanks. But it's one of those things where just some faithfulness and walking through it. And every time I told God what I was going to do, he changed it. So I stopped doing that. And this is where I get to be right now, which is just awesome.
Yeah, I love that. I think we can definitely unpack what owning your faith looks like a little bit here later on, but maybe kind of following up, like, what do you think separates outside of the campus size, right? The reach, 8 campuses now with Grace Family. What do you think it is about maybe the culture that makes Grace different from some of the other churches that you've been involved in, or even some of the churches that you were raised in, that's kind of changing, your perception on things?
And I'll just say this too, and I'm not saying this just to say this, like, we need more churches.
Yeah.
We do. Yeah, I've told people this before. If Tampa is actually one of the most unchurched big cities, I think we were actually less church than Vegas on the last thing.
No kidding.
Just
Wow.
Just a side note. Yeah. So when you're like, yeah, hell, Vegas, haha, no, Tampa. It's one of those things. So I'm always on the side of, and I think we need a bunch of different churches. But I think what is different about Grace, one, it starts from the top down with Craig, Pastor Craig. He is just him. When people just, it's like, it's Craig. That's just who he is. And he's never tried to be anything else. He's never tried to, be the guy that tours or does anything. He's just like, God's called me here. This is what I'm going to do. And in 30 years, he's done it. And the environment that has been set up is just one that just loves people, cares for people, and really has incredible grace for people. Wherever you're at, you can walk in. And we really do. We do our best to help you feel like your family. Now, you can reject that very easily and just stay on the outside, but we talk about it so stinking much and getting involved with people. Like, I think I heard the other day, Pastor Neil, who's over our group, said we have 90% of our weekend attendance is in a small group. And so that's always the thing. People go, oh, big churches are this. No, big churches grow for a reason. Now, the biggest problem that can happen with a big church is if it refuses to grow small, and because it's a lot easier just to have the stage. That's probably the easiest part. The hardest part is the relational side of it, is getting into people's lives, getting people connected, helping people understand, like, there's more to this than just the weekend. And so I think that's what has set Grace apart, is it's not that we're like the most amazing church in the world. It's just we've been very purposeful in the things that we believe God says matters.
Yeah. And I think the family component is something that's huge here. Yeah. And that's I felt immediately when I walked in late 2018. I had maybe half a dozen experiences with churches prior to being 35 years old. There was a couple Catholic churches that we attended when I was a kid growing up. Easter Sunday, put a tie on, sitting in the back. We're like, oh, we don't belong here. I got in trouble one time for doing a communion at a Catholic church with a friend's family, because I hadn't gone through the official, ceremony of doing that. And they're like, what are you doing? You're not supposed to be doing that. So growing up, like, I always saw myself as not a church person. I'm like, there's people that go to church, they are over there. And then there's our family, like, we're just not church people. And then when I gave my life to Christ in late 2018, my mentor at the time was like, read the Bible, find a church, read the Bible, find a church. Like, those were his only instructions to me. I was like, I don't know what I'm looking for. I don't know. And the Grace name was something that was familiar in Tampa Bay, right? This was 2018. So it had already been 25, 24 years around. I said, well, there's this Grace place that I know people go to. Let me check it out. And I remember walking in on a Saturday evening. Matt Roden was here at the time. They were teaching a message on Samson. And sat way up in the top, balcony. Now you guys know I'm first, second row every single week. I'm sitting up there by myself. I'm like, this place is kind of vibing. Like the worship was amazing, brought me right in. I was like, and then the message hit, and I'm like, this guy Samson, I kind of relate to him a little bit. And I probably met 3 pastors that approached me that first day and just introduced themselves, and it made me feel like I belonged here. And I'm like, my search is done. Like I found my home, I found my church, and then I got baptized later that year on Good Friday of 2019, and the rest has kind of been history. So I felt that family. I felt that connection. I felt the grace, the welcoming. We're big, we're building, but hey, when you get in here, like we're all about you. What's going on with you? And everybody, since I've come here, has supported everything we've done with the podcast, everything we've done with the coaching and the work. So it's been really incredible. Looking back, Hal, are you able to see now maybe what some people in your early life saw in you? That when they're like, hey, you're going to be a pastor, like, can you look back and kind of see what they were pointing to?
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's funny. I still go back. This is a crazy moment. And it's people that weren't even in ministry, but it was, I remember riding in a car to church camp with just one of the leaders, and we're just going, and his engine kept messing up. And this is one of those crazy things that came back to me literally the other day. I didn't even think about it, but he's like, can you pray for it? I prayed for it. And we get there, and he goes, did you notice like the engine didn't mess up the rest of the time? I'm like, that's awesome. Not that, and let me just say this, it's not that pastors have more power like that, yeah. But he was like one of the, he goes, I don't know what it is. He goes, I think there's something in you there. And I remember going, okay. And just walking through it and just seeing, my biggest thing is always, I think my biggest contribution is to make the Bible understandable. Like, I think that's what Jesus did. Like, he told parables over and over again to help people understand it. And like, I love that side of it. And like, just to help people just grasp just a little bit more of who Jesus is. And so just being able to do that early on, and people going, well, you say it in a way that I get. And I'm like, well, a lot of pastors do. Like, that's not a big deal. And then just allowing and seeing it come through. I think it was just more of me just wanting to be my own person. And because, I mean, so I'm the 4th. I'm Hal the 4th. My son is Hal the 5th. We didn't. And,
I love that.
And
man.
So, but when you're Hal the 4th, then everybody's like, oh, you're just like your dad. You're this. And my dad, if you haven't met him, is a huge individual. He's about 6'5", 6'6", 280 muscle, about 70 years old. Doesn't look like he should. And he's just a big dude. And so you're in his shadow your entire life kind of deal. And so you're like, I want to be something different. But it was like, no, this is what I've been. I mean, it really was. It was what I was parented for. It was what I was brought up in. It was just an opportunity. And it is. I'll just say this on top of that. I think as parents, and I'm not saying this necessarily for my dad, but I think this is the case. A lot of times the greatest thing we will ever do is in the kids that we raise. And so, I mean, it's that multiplication that happens. And both me and my sister, I mean, following after God, my sister is incredible following after God, and with her family and the 3 kids and all that. And so I do. I think looking back, I see it now, but it's just kind of funny because even in my dad's big leadership person, got his doctorate in educational leadership, all this. So that's what he wanted me to be. Executive pastor, overseeing everything. I'm like, that's not me. I have no attention to detail. Like none. Like I just don't. Like I don't see it. At Temple Terrace, like we put up some plants in the foyer area, and 3 months later I went, hey, when we get plants? And they're all looking at me like, oh my God. What are you talking about? Like you approved the expense. I'm like, that's my bad. But I do. I see it. It's just, and what's crazy, and I'll say this too, looking back at even all of the hardships, all of that makes sense now. And we always tell people, like, when you walk through it on the other side, God will use it. And in the middle of that, if you would have told me that, I would have been like, no, this is the worst point of my life. I mean, I thought divorce was on the table. I thought all this was on the table. But now on the other side, it's like, oh, that's why we did it. That's why he brought me through. So
I think you let a lot of people down when you said that pastors don't have a direct line to God. I think everybody thought you guys had them on speed dial, or there's this like WhatsApp chat that all pastors and God are on. It's like, hey, we get the answer. So there's nothing.
I mean, we have a responsibility. That's one of the things, like the Bible says, like those who teach are held to a higher standard, which I really hate that verse. And so, but it's true. We're called to that, but we don't have any closer relationship with God than anybody else does. I think some of the greatest prayer warriors I know are not pastors. And man, I have a small group leader that from the age I was in 10th grade, he prays for me every morning at 4:30 in the morning. I know that. One of the greatest influences because of what he does. Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of people don't feel qualified because of their mess, right? So that's incredible. Daryl, let's turn it to you here, man. You know, Hal, we got a good backstory on him, what led him here to Grace. You mentioned a couple things in the opening, R&B, thousands of people. We know you've been on television here. Walk us through your journey and how that kind of all led you to being a part of this teaching team here at Grace today.
I mean, Hal and I have a similar background. My father's a pastor, Pentecostal to the core. Pentecostal, charismatic. That's what I grew up in. And my father's an incredible preacher and musician. Most of my family are musicians and singers all the way as far back as I can remember. So I grew up in that. Just my father was, two things were important to him. You got to learn the Bible and you got to play music. He didn't care about anything else other than working hard. Like he always had 2 or 3 jobs. He's pastoring a church. He ran his own auto body shop, and he worked for Chrysler. So he was, my whole childhood was him watching him work hard. And I just loved seeing him do what he did. He even, his office was in my bedroom, me and my brother's bedroom. Our bedroom was in the basement. And so there were no separating walls, but his office was on one end, and he had the whole library full of encyclopedias, and I loved watching him study. And from a kid, people were telling me, hey, you're going to be a pastor. No, I have no interest, no desire in it. I knew very young that I knew I was called to preach, but I just didn't want to do it. And I especially didn't want to do it like I was seeing it. So for me, it was, I know I'm called to do that, but there's all this other stuff I want to do and I'm good at. And so maybe I'm not called to preach. Maybe people are just saying that and I want to do all this other stuff. And so I graduated high school at 16, moved to New York and had partial scholarship and lived there for years and loved it. So I got to meet wonderful people. So went on tour, did jazz tours, did stuff on Broadway, off Broadway, had a record deal with the group, and we had mediocre success, but we were traveling with all these major artists, and we were with, Boyz II Men and Babyface and back in the day, all that stuff. So we were doing these concerts that were 50, 60, 70,000 people, which was awesome. And the thing that always struck me is, and all the guys that I was in this group with, we're all church boys. We're all preachers' kids. But I would go out places and someone would come up to me and go, yeah, you're not supposed to be here. You're different. You're not supposed to be here. And I was trying to be there. Like I was doing my best to look like everybody else. So I'm wearing the silky shirts. I'm doing whatever because I don't want anybody to go, you're not supposed to be here. And everywhere, I mean, we could be in Germany or Japan or anywhere in the States and someone go, what are you doing? Why are you here? You're not supposed to be here. And I got irritated for years because I'm good at what I do. I'm having fun. Why are they pointing me out and going, I'm not supposed to be here? And it was frustrating. But all that time, I never disconnected myself from God in church, which is interesting. So I'm out doing an R&B concert, and it will be late on Saturday night. And we may not get back from the concert till 3 o'clock in the morning. It doesn't matter where I was in the world. I'm finding a church on Sunday. And it didn't matter what the denomination was. I didn't care. It was, this is what I do on Sunday. We go to church on Sunday. I'm going to find a church. So if it's Catholic, Methodist, Pentecostal, if it's near the hotel, I'm going to church. And that was always my thing. And my bandmates and friends thought, why would you? We just got back to the hotel and you're going to go to church? I'm like, yeah, it's what I do. We go to church. And so that there was always that. I think there was always that I don't want to get too far away from God. And just some of it was fear. And I would watch people kind of doing drugs or just being real crazy. And those are things that I never got involved in. And I there was this fear of, man, that could be me. And I think if I get too far away from God, I'm going to end up doing that. And so I made a decision one day to go, okay, what am I doing? I know what God is calling me to do, but I'm running. It's a slow jog, but I'm running away. And I had my mentor who lives in Jersey kind of arrested me. It was a crazy thing. I was on tour for a bunch. But every time I was doing this tour, they were short days. So we would be gone for like 4 days, be back in New York. Gone for 6 days, be back in New York. And so I found this church in Jersey, and they didn't have an organist. And just so happened, I was back at home every Sunday for a whole year. It had never happened like that before, but back at home. And so I was playing for this church every Sunday. And this guy became my mentor, loved on me from the day I walked into church, loved on me. I didn't want to get paid. I was like, hey, I'm just doing this because I love it. And he mentored me, covered me, prayed for me. And then one day he walked to my door and he said, hey, it's time for you to leave. It's time for you to grow. And you can't grow if you stay here. So you got to leave. And literally, I mean, we stood on my front porch and cried because I thought I would live in New York forever. And he's like, nah, you got to go. And I just got married. I've been married for 2 years at that time. He said, nope, God told me you got to go. You have to leave this place. And 2 months later, I moved to St. Louis. I was born in St. Louis, but I moved to St. Louis. Last thing I ever wanted to do was move to St. Louis. Never planned on ever moving back, but it was one of the best things that ever happened for me because I got a chance to go, okay, God, it was a learning period. Went to seminary, really dove into the Bible, learned theology, got my degrees and a bunch of different things. And it was a season for me to build my foundation and really work on, this is what God wants me to do. Never knew what it was going to be or where it was going, and still never wanted to pastor. And people were always going, hey, you're gonna be our pastor. You're gonna pastor church. I'm fine. No, I saw what my father went through. I don't want to go through that. I know how hard it is. I'll work at church, but I don't want to pastor at all. And I want to do what I do and go home. And I'm an introvert like Hal is. I want to do what I do and I want to go home. But God kept pushing me in front of people and tapping on my shoulder and doing things. And I wrestled with it for a while until I just said, oh, okay, God, if this is what you want me to do, open the door. I'm not going to go look for it. I'm not looking for it. I'm not sending out no resumes. I'm not even going to tell anybody. So if this is what you want, open up the door. And when I said that years ago, within days, it was like all these people start calling me and emailing me, hey, you want to come serve at our church? And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. And I had given God, and we went from Missouri, doing that in Missouri, and then God moved us to California, which was awesome. And even when we moved to California, I was giving God ultimatums, which you shouldn't do. Never give God an ultimatum. But I was giving God ultimatums because I wanted to do something different. Have you ever been in that place and you're going, well, God, if you want me to do it, it has to look like this. So I want to be I want to live in this area. I want to be by these people. I want it to be this much money, and I want to do this. And my ultimatums were, I know it's not going to happen. It was because there are no churches in this area like this. There's no houses in this area like this. None of those things exist. So I know it's not going to happen. So if I do something else, hey, it's not on me. It's on you. And God was like, oh, I got you. And boom. Church shows up with everything that I wanted, everything that I asked for, plus some. And it's like God has a sense of humor. And even coming to grace was such an interesting thing. So a year before I left, a year before I came here, I was at my former church. I felt like me and my wife is incredible. Tracy's is her ability to see the future and I wouldn't call it prophecy, but her ability to kind of know, hey, God is wrapping these things up. It's time for us to think about something else. Is incredible. I'm more stubborn. And I was like, I don't know. But 2 years before we left, my wife was going, hey, we need to get prepared to leave. I didn't see it. It took me about a year later, and I was like, yeah, I think I see it now. But I didn't know what that was. I just knew we were leaving that ministry, didn't know where else we were going. And I was like, God, I want to stay in California. I like California. I like the weather. My kids have grown up here. We enjoy it. This is good. I've got a lot of community and connection that we made. I like California. So if we do it, God, if I move from this church, I want to stay in California. Chances are, a friend of mine who worked for Grace, known him over 15 years, and he called me and said, hey, you want to come speak at my church one weekend? Sure. I speak at churches, all over the country. No big deal. Came and spoke, brought my wife, loved it, loved Grace, had a great time. And from the moment that we got here, the time that we spent, we only were with Craig maybe 30 minutes because his son was getting married that weekend. So we didn't hang out with him very much, but everybody else was incredible. And me and my wife, we've been in a lot of churches, and you just know authentic relationship building people. You just know, oh man, those people are solid. And we just felt that. And so when we left, we were just like, yo, we got to make sure that we keep them on the roster because they're a great church to have. And time went by. We didn't think anything else of it. And that was in November of 21, I think that was. So that was in November. 22, February, Craig calls me out of the blue. I haven't seen this dude in 2-3 months. He calls me out of the blue and was like, hey, what's going on? And nothing. Hey, I got this job here for you. And and I'm thinking, I don't even know you. Like I don't know you. How are you offering me the job? Like we haven't spent time together. So I don't even know what's going on. So, we had a good conversation, but what my wife hadn't told me, she had been dreaming about Grace since November. Didn't tell me that. And Craig and I, we're having some good conversations, and I'm just going, hey, I don't know that we're going to be moving to Florida. Because of all the places that my wife says we would never move, it was Florida. It was the one place, because she knew, like, if we move from California, maybe we go to Nashville, or I wanted to go back to New York. Or Colorado or something like that. And she's like, never Florida, never Florida. I had job offers in Miami, and my wife's like, don't even answer them back because we're not moving to Florida. Cool. Florida is out. Me and Craig having a great conversation. I was like, hey, man, I don't know that I'm supposed to be working there, but, man, I love our relationship. I love to keep connecting with you guys. And, I know we're supposed to be doing something a little more substantial, but it's not a job. It's just me, hey, coming more often, and let's do that. But, man, God kept poking at me, poking at my wife. And it was my wife who was like, yeah, I think this is it. And even still, we didn't know what was going on because there wasn't really a position. There wasn't really a job. It was, man, if I could tell you the whole story. I don't even know if I could tell the whole story on here.
Let's just say that, like, Pastor Craig is just someone that just goes, we're going to figure it out.
Well, I was going to say, I think we figured out the secret to great success is Craig's the ultimate salesman. Like the way that he just called you up and assumed the close. Daryl, I got the job for you. It's ready.
And I'm like,
you just
bro,
assumed that he was going to be like, and then
yeah. Here you go. And I was like, first of all, I'm not looking for a job. So why are you offering me a job? And there really is no job. So there was all of these things together. And I was just, he called me one day and goes, hey, man, what do you want to do? And I'm just sharing my passions with him about how I feel about ministry and what I want to do in ministry. These are the things I'm really passionate about. And Craig was like, yeah, let's do that. And,
and it wasn't even a job.
It wasn't even a job. He was like, yeah, let's do that. I'm like, okay. Is that a position? And what's happening? And so I remember getting off the phone and my wife going, what just happened? I said, I think we're moving to Florida. I don't know what happened. But, bro, since I've been here, I know I'm right where I'm supposed to be. It wasn't easy. It was not an easy transition. It's a whirlwind. That first year, our family went through a lot of stuff, emotional stuff, and some depression and anxiety and just some really horrible things that were in my time. The first year I was here, I kept questioning God. God, are you sure this is where I'm supposed to be? Because this is not smooth sailing at all. I like the people, but is it worth it? Is this worth? This is not what I wanted to take my family through. This is not what I want to take my wife through. This is not what I wanted to experience in this season of ministry at all. Did I get it wrong? And God was really going, pay attention. pay attention. And when I really sat down and paid attention to what was happening, it was God taking me through a season of growth, exercising my patience, helping me understand who I am, what our family was really supposed to do. He was fine-tuning me, and still is, but he was fine-tuning me for things that I didn't even know was coming. And some of those things were things that I asked for, but I had no idea, oh, this is how you're going to work me out for this? Had no idea at all. And so, bro, I'm so grateful to be where I am, doing what I'm doing, and get to do it with awesome people. I've been in church my whole life, and to say this is one of the best experiences, when you said it earlier, sometimes church find it difficult, especially when you get a certain size, to be small, to be family. And it's one of the first things that I recognize, oh, we do family well. We do. There's a whole lot of stuff we're working on and try to figure out. But the family part, the people that just embraced us was overwhelming. And yeah. And so this is one of the first times that I could say, not only do I love my church, I know my church loves me. And that's not, because in when you're growing up and you're gifted and you're anointed, you get the sense that, man, people are just using you for what you bring to the table, which is, and I know that's a part of, ministry. And for the most part, I haven't had a problem with that, because you go, yes, I bring a value and you love the value that I bring. That's cool. But when you get away from that and go, oh, they like me. They really like me. So it's really different when those people love you and they're caring for you.
For who you are.
Not just whether you can bring something to the table. And so we've yeah.
Well, and I'll just say this, because you understand it, I understand it. One of the reasons neither of us probably want to be pastors too is we got to see, people always talk about church hurt. There is no one that is probably more church hurt than pastors. Because people throw everything at you. Like, people you don't know send you emails that are just mean. And so it's just like one of those things, like, you see the other side of it, and it's like, man, you walk through it on a regular basis, and you got to go, nope, this is what I believe, because everybody has their idea of what their perfect church would be, and their perfect sermon, and all those things. And it's fun to get random emails that, just tear you apart. And you're like, actually,
and the part that for everybody in church, their assumption of you is that you're on call for them personally, and they cannot. Sometimes people can't fathom that you actually have a life or responsibilities or that, because it's like, well, why didn't you respond to me? Hey, I called you yesterday and I didn't get a response. Bro, 300 people called me yesterday. I didn't even know you called. We're going to get there. There's just one me, and maybe I got an assistant, and still there's just a lot going on. And so we get those on the pavers, and we get hey, I sent you an email last night and you didn't respond yet. I was at church. I was hanging out with my family.
They're like, hey, I texted you 10 minutes ago. You didn't see me on the stage? It's like I wasn't checking my phone mid-sermon.
Right. I didn't even experience it. You're at Publix, and people are like, why are you at Publix? I'm like, I eat too.
Yeah.
People just, they're like, this is where we see you on the weekend. This is where you live.
Yeah.
This is who you are.
Mm-hmm. They went back home to God. They thought that, remember I said before, they thought you guys all had them on WhatsApp chat. They thought that when you're done on the Sunday, you return home to God, and then you get your instructions for next week. I want to go back to something that you were talking about in the music, in your early career working in the industry, that you had all these people telling you, you don't belong here. You're supposed to be somewhere else. Maybe even kind of felt some of that internally. I think so many people listening to this and probably people that you deal with on a daily basis wrestle with that, right? Yeah. We know that there's something calling us somewhere else to be, but we're trying to fit in over here. Yeah. And it creates an internal conflict. For you, do you think it was that consistency with plugging into Sundays that kept you from maybe going completely astray? And then what piece of advice out there for somebody that's caught up in that right now? I feel internally, whether it's a conscious God speaking to me or other people tell me I'm supposed to be over here, but a part of me wants to stay fit in this circle.
Yeah. I would say definitely what kept me from probably running the streets was I had that element, like I can't get too far away from God. I just can't do it. And some, like I said, some of that was fear, because I'd seen in my family, in my friends, people who did stray away become full-on addicts in areas and just be all out. And I'm like, God, I can't see myself doing that, and I don't want to be doing. And I don't know how they got there, but if it means being away from you, I at least got to do this. I at least got to let me hold on. I'm gonna stretch out over here on this side, but I at least got to keep a hold on you. And so I was always scared of that. But I think the other part was, I think most people know what God wants them to do. I think what I did, what most people do, is we reinterpret it. And we reinterpret it and we filter it through how I feel and what I want to do, instead of what did God say do. I think this is a Adam and Eve issue. This is when Satan comes to Eve and goes, "Hey, did God really say that?" Then she filters it through, well, it looks good. It looks good for food, so maybe it's not really what he said. It's more of what I want. And we do, because dude, when I was a kid, 4 years old, my mom died when I was 7 years old. And I think my mother was a prophet. When I was 4 years old, my mother told me, she said, you're going to be a worship leader. People are going to hear your songs and you're going to preach the gospel. 4 years old. Now, at 4 years old, back then, we didn't really know what a worship leader was. We know what singers were. They called them singers and psalmists and stuff like that. But my mother called me a worship leader and wrote it in her, she had a journal. I still have her journal to this day, that I'm going to be a worship leader. She knew what each one of her children were going to be. And she wrote it in a journal, worship leader. Now, I heard it. She said it. God confirmed it. But I reinterpreted to, oh, my mother said the world is going to hear stuff that I say and things that I sing. So maybe that's R&B. Maybe, that's pop music. Maybe, and listen, I did everything. I've written songs in pop and country. I've done soundtracks. I've worked on commercials. That was me reinterpreting, hey, she said the world was going to hear it. So maybe I've got to create the avenue for the world to hear it. And I think that's what most of us do. And we would go, oh, I'm confused about what my purpose is. I'm confused about what I'm supposed to do. Well, what did he say? Let's go back to what he said. And if you're confused about what he said, consecrate, fast, strip everything away. If you put your feelings aside, your children, your marriage, your whatever, if you set those things here and say, okay, God, what did you call me to do? I need to know my thing. Because if God doesn't tell you, then that means God's not fair. Because why would you put me on this earth and then not tell me what I'm supposed to do? And then I have to figure it out, which is the worst thing to do. You're going to let the creation figure it out. We're horrible at figuring things out. We mess it up all along the way. So it's like when I think about Genesis and Adam, God never asked Adam what he wants to do. He tells him. So Adam's only responsibility is to listen and then go do it. That's our responsibility. Listen and then go do it. And once you step back from all that stuff, I think taking moments to consecrate, taking moments to meditate and go, okay, God. First of all, everybody has the same call. The first call is, man, we're supposed to live for God. That's that. But then how do I live my specific purpose out in that? What has God given me specifically to live those things out? So what is your skill set? What am I good at? When I was a kid, like I never thought I would be a preacher. Never, even when people would tell me I would be a preacher, all that. Dude, I had a speech impediment for years. So I'm like, I'm not the guy. I can barely talk. I can't. I had a lisp. I still have it. I have a lisp. I couldn't form my words. I was the kid when you call on in class to read. Dude, I would have an anxiety attack. It's like, you want me to read in public? No. So, I had to overcome those things and thinking, this kid is going to be in front of stages speaking? Heck no. And the only time that I felt like I could really formulate how to be in front of people was when I was singing. It was the only time my speech impediment wasn't in front of me is when I was singing songs. So I just figured, hey, I'm going to be a singer and then call it a day. But I would think for anybody is, man, listen to what God said. Just not what your mama said, not what your dad said. What is God saying to you about what you're supposed to do when it's not filtered through your anxiety, your preferences, all of those other things? What is it?
Yeah, and this is where a person's faith, I think, is really going to be tested and challenged, right? Once you hear that call and you kind of, okay, God, I'm listening now. I need to take this first step. You know, you're sharing the story of Craig and how he's like, we're just going to figure it out. You know, that's a dude that, like, Craig has ultimate faith, right? You know, there's a great book in the business entrepreneurship space called Ready, Fire, Aim. Yeah. And it's once you're ready, fire, jump out of the plane, and then you aim later on. You'll figure it out. And I think that's what makes a great entrepreneur. I think that's what makes a great a business builder, makes a great pastor. Is like, we don't know how we're going to figure all this stuff out. It's exampled in both of your guys' stories. Hey, I felt somewhere over here. I didn't see step 4, step 5, but I could see the first 2. So I took the first 2, trusting in God, having faith. Hal, if you can maybe speak to that a little bit, just for, you know, kind of piggybacking off of this part of the conversation, just, you know, once we kind of hear that call, how do we build and kind of develop that faith, trusting that God is going to provide in those next steps for us?
It's not an easy thing to do. And I'll say this too, and you heard it in his story and my story. Just because something hard happens is not a God saying no.
Yeah.
It's not.
Right.
In fact, expect it. Because many times if God's calling you to something big, the enemy doesn't want you to do it. And so a lot of times it's that, and I'll say this too, especially as men in society today, I think a lot of times your calling is in, what is it that you see in society that you have a righteous anger about? Like you look at and you go, that's not right. Like, because there's a lot of things that are not going well in our society that I don't feel an immediate, like, I need to rush to that. And it's not that I don't think it's a big deal. It's just, I don't have that righteous anger about it. It's not what I'm looking to go after. I know with you, with pornography and sex trafficking and all those things, you see that and you're going, man, I got to do something about it. And so it's leaning into that. I always tell people one of the hardest things to do in the beginning is lean in. Because what happens is whatever God is calling you into is always scary. It's beyond what you think. It's funny, you talk about the speech impediment. I was the quietest kid in the world. Like, it's funny, when my kids, from my friends from middle school and high school see that I speak on a stage, they're like, you got to be kidding me. You never looked up from the ground. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like, and I don't think I ever talked to a girl. I don't even know how I got a date. Like, I think a girl claimed me a couple times, and that's just what happened. Like, I don't know how it happened.
What's this big, tall, white kid over here?
Like, it was. And so it was just like one of those things that just happened. And so it's just kind of funny how that goes. But you got to lean into it. I remember we found that around even foster care. And like one of the hardest things is leaning into it, because then you see all the things that are surrounding it. Like when you find out the stats, like 90% of the girls that are sex trafficked in Florida are out of the foster care system. When you see like was it like 75? It's either 2/3 or 3/4 of the prison population were in foster care. And you start leaning into these things. That's not it. What it can feel like is overwhelming. And you go, well, then I can't solve this problem. You can't. Like, you can't, but that's not what God's calling you to do. And don't assume that what God is calling you to do, you are doing it in your own power. Because the idea of speaking on a stage as a high schooler, no, absolutely not. But it's in God's power and what he's going to do and work through you. And so you lean in. You get around other people that have that same calling, that same thing on their life, and you go, what did you do? How are you going after this? And you bring other people praying for you. And ask other people that are really wise around you to speak into it. And then you got to take a step. You got to move towards it. Get involved in whatever it is that you feel like God's calling you to. Find somebody that's ahead of you and going, will you help me understand how to do this? And so with foster care, it was like, all right, we're going to go to the orientation class. We didn't sign up for anything, but we're going to the orientation class. I still remember one of the first stories they talked about was a family adopting 10 kids out of foster care. And I was so like surprised by it. My leg hit the table and everybody looked at me. I'm like, that's not what we're all called to do, right? Like I literally went like, that's not the thing, right? But even in that, it's like, man, every step of the way, and even being a pastor, it's like, man, could be so much. I wanted to go in the medical field. Like, I was like, pastors don't make any money, and I still amaze my wife married me. She didn't ask for my W-2, but it's stepping into it. Every single person has a calling. Every single person has something on their life that they're called to do. And for some of you, it may even just be in your neighborhood. Caring for the people that are around you, starting a group of people, caring for those people. It may be, it can be even a small group leader. I still think one of the greatest things you can do with your life is invest in the next generation. One of the biggest lies that Satan has told the older generation is the younger generation doesn't like you or need you. They are searching for you. Will they reject you at first? Absolutely, because everybody in their life has rejected them and pushed them away. But we have to lean in enough and believe, if God's called me to this, I'm going to push through it because there's something better on the other side. But at the same time, I need to stay really close to God in that time. I mean, Daryl talked about just the consecration and stuff. Fasting has been a regular part of my life. I mean, actually, it's funny. I started fasting big time, and the greatest thing God told me was, don't move. Because I was like, this isn't working. Where I'm at right now, and it was at Grace. I'm like, where I'm at right now, it doesn't feel like this is the place I need to be. And God's like, stay. Seriously? For 5 years? And I'm like, and then all of a sudden, everything changes. I go, oh. But it's like, you got me. All right, you're right. But it's just, it's those things. It's not easy. Get yourself around the right people that will encourage you in it. Because I'll tell you this, when you step out in God's calling, you will be surprised at the people that will not be on board.
Yeah. Wow.
And man, it is, and even other Christians. Because here's what happens. When you take out a big step with God, the Christians that aren't doing anything with their life.
Oh, they're tested and challenged.
They don't like it. They're like, oh, you're going to be one of those. What do you mean, like a Christian? Like that's
yeah.
Actually following God and living it out. Is that was I would like to be one of those. And they do. They call you and they tell you. Well, I still remember when we stepped in a lot of things. Like in foster care, they're like, "Are you sure?" And we talked about one of the situations we went through. They're like, "You gave it a good shot," and we were like a week in. I'm like, it's funny because I had the same. I told you this before, man. I was like 6 months into marriage. Me and Chrissy had a big fight. I shared it with one of my single friends. He goes, "Well, you gave it a good shot."
Oh my God.
I was like, "Yeah, you're not the friend I need to be talking to anymore." I was like, "That's not divorce. That's just me going, yeah, it's like that." And so, I do. You got to lean into it. Surround yourself with the right people, and get uncomfortable. We chase comfort. And comfort is actually one of the biggest signs that, hey, I'm missing something.
That's a weapon from the enemy. Comfort and pleasure. And I mean, our society is built, I always call it, we live in a microwave society. Yeah. Any problem that you're dealing with, anything you want, push of a button, the answer and solution is there. Hungry, push a button, food shows up at your door. Need some sex or need some intimacy, push a button, you can either have pornography, or these days you can actually have sex. Like that stuff you can be purchased online. Like our society and culture is just shaped to create culture, or to comfort. So it takes us being intentional about stepping out. I love that you both have talked about the struggle and challenge of even speaking. I mean, you both called yourself introverts. I think a lot of people here, I'm the same. Like the only thing I remember from being a kid was being told to shut up. So I'm like, oh, I'm just not supposed to speak. Like, so I was the same way. Like I was very quiet and shy. Like my head was down. And when people see that I speak now, and I've done thousands of YouTube videos, hundreds of podcasts, like for me, it was very intentional, showing up to Toastmasters every single week, learning to speak, failing, getting back, reviewing, challenging, test myself. So I'll kind of tee this up to both of you. You guys are in the seats that you are here at Grace for many reasons, certain gifts, but also because you deliver a message in what I think is an incredible way. We have 20 plus pastors on staff here, and Craig, if not 40, 50 plus, Craig could probably fly in, celebrities every single weekend to speak if he ultimately wanted to, but he chose you guys and himself to be the regular teaching pastors, because I believe it's how you guys deliver from the pulpit on a Sunday message. So talk about some of the things that you guys have done in the development of that skill of being a pastor, because you've already said it's not that you have a closer relationship with God. You don't have him on WhatsApp chat, so you're not getting a downloaded message. Like, yeah, you guys are in the Word, you guys are allowing the Spirit to speak through you, but I know you're both intentional about putting in the work to craft that skill. So either one of you jump in and take it, but kind of talk about how you've developed that skill.
First of all, it takes hours just to craft one message. I think, we're up there for 30, 35 minutes, but people don't realize that any typical message is 10 hours or more, 10 hours minimum, just for a 30-minute message, because you've got to study, you got to do the research, you've got to consecrate, you've got to make sure that you're in the right place. And a lot of time we're doing these messages and they're speaking to us first before they speak to somebody else. So you've got to internalize that. There's a whole lot that goes into doing that. But early on, when I knew, okay, God, this is what you're going to be calling me to do, let me be committed to what I need to know. I already grew up in a house where studying the Bible was a thing. It wasn't even optional. You're going to learn the Bible whether you want to or not. My father would walk into the room and go, hit it. And hit it meant that you had to quote all the names of the Bible from beginning to the end. And he did not play. And so we had to memorize 3 scriptures every week, 3 different scriptures so that was part of my growing up developmental stage. Even part of our punishment was us reading the dictionary. So my father would say, you got to find you're in trouble or you're on punishment or whatever, you got to find a new word. in a dictionary. You got to use that word 3 times a day in a sentence. And so those things were part of my early development. But when I made the decision, okay, God, this is what I'm going to do, is I started to put systems together. Okay, how do you really study the Bible to learn how to present it in a preaching? And I would watch videos early on, videos from Moody Bible Institute, Oral Roberts University, and Billy Graham. I would watch Billy Graham videos. And then I went to school. And so I went to New York Theological Seminary. Then I went to Liberty University. I went to Concordia and got a degree in psychology, PhD in that. And so I said, let me learn and study how to systematically look at Scripture and give it to people. I think one of the most valuable things that my father taught me, he said, learn as much as you can so you can teach a little bit of it. And he would always say, hey, learn as much education so you could teach it at a 6th grade level. But he said, you have to know more. If you don't know all of this, you'll never be able to explain it like this. And so I love studying. I probably overstudy. And my wife thinks I'm crazy. If I find a bookstore or a Borders books, dude, it's like a candy store for me. I'm in there with a notebook. I'm opening up books. I got them all out on the table. I just love the act of studying and gaining knowledge. And so that is really important. I would say for anybody doing anything, man, you got to put the time in.
Become an expert. 10,000 hours, right?
Yeah.
Mastery, Robert Greene.
Put the time in. And even still, the Bible, because the Bible is living, I'm always finding new things. So I've studied Greek. I've took 4 years of Greek. I took 2 years of Hebrew, and I'm always finding things to go, oh, wow, I didn't notice that before. I didn't see, man, this one word changes the whole way that I look at this scripture or this verse, and like, wow, I didn't see that happening. God, thank you for revealing that to me. And so you got to really jump in. And I know he spends that time in. This is one of the reasons why we resonate so well, because I know that I've got a partner in ministry that's really didactic and jumping into the word and cares about how to teach it. And we go at it. Like, we give each other feedback. Hey, man, one thing I love about our church is on the weekends, we give each other feedback. And I look forward to, what is he going to say? What is he going to, like there are some times when you do a mess and you go, oh, this is a home run. This is a killer. And no one's going to say anything because everything is perfect. I've rehearsed it. I've memorized it. I've done all this. And then you get in the room and then Hal chops you up to pieces and goes, he's like, you said this wrong and this. No, he doesn't do that.
Is there a competitive nature, though, in between the two of you? I mean, you've made some jokes, I think, a few times where, like, you'll mid-sermon, you start singing. It's like you got the vocals there.
It's not fair that the man can sing the way that he does. It's just not. Like, I have to actually think of how I'm going to open and close a message.
Yeah.
The man just sings it. He just sings it and goes into it. It's just not fair.
Just segue straight from the worship thing. It's like smooth transition.
What's funny is people naturally assume there's going to be that really competitive side. Yeah. Because I remember, I think I told you, like, they're like, man, he hasn't been singing as much. Did they tell him he wasn't allowed to?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
No, but it's funny because we're so different.
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of weird that we're even in the same church, because you don't see that very often. Normally, whoever the lead guy is, very, very similar. And so it's not like I even tried. We can't be like each other. We're very different, but it's great because it's two different ways of really bringing the same stuff. And it is, I'll tell you this, like, the best part of putting together a message is the study. The hardest part is getting it down to 30 minutes.
Yes.
And because you have all this stuff, and both of us have, I mean, I forgot. We were thinking about just the number of messages that we've given over the years, because in youth ministry and all that kind of stuff, I'm teaching 2 messages at least a week and putting it all together. So it is like that 10,000 hours, like that number of sermons. And it's fun because we get to help a lot of these guys that are on staff right now. They're learning. I'm like, God, bro, you're a baby in this. Yeah. Like, I know you're on a big stage and that you are lucky to have that. But I mean, my first messages were to like 10 kids. And so, but I also think this, if you can, you said a 6th grader, or 6-year-old, but I think one of the greatest, like to prepare me for it was teaching to students, because if you can get a middle schooler to pay attention, you're the greatest communicator in the world.
That's true. Wow. That's
because,
really true.
And at the same level, people think, oh, you're going to bring it up so much for adults. No, you're not, because we're all, it's all, I mean, you may bring a little bit more history and the behind the scenes and stuff like that to it, but you're still trying to break it down on such a level that everybody can get it. And look, I don't know who's in my room. Like, and so you have people across that. I'm going, how can I make sure that I say this in a way, one, that hits as many people in the room as possible, that connects with as many people in the room as possible, and they all know what their next step is. And so it is. I mean, you say 10 hours. That was nice of you. It's probably, I would say, especially with rehearsal, all that 20 to 40 hours is normally, and unless it's a message you've done before, which that has not happened a lot lately. And so you're putting the time into it because you should know it better than everybody else in the room, at least. I mean, there are some people that have incredible biblical knowledge, but because when you know it really well, then you can say it. But I'll say this too, it's kind of funny. People go, you're an introvert, how do you speak from stage? I'm like, it's the most introverted thing I do. Mm-hmm. I said, because I'm giving a message, I don't have to listen to you. Like this is not a going back and forth.
Yeah.
You are not talking to me and I have to actively listen and go, and then think of a response. Like I put together what I think you need to know and I get to say it. But it is, and it's fun to do, and you figure it out, you walk through it. And I mean, there's times crafting a message, you're dealing with the tension in the room, the flow in the room. I mean, there's times where you hit people really hard, and I'm like, I got to put a story or something in here. Because people can only handle so much. You can only handle so much of the tension being high before you just disconnect. And so how do I bring people back in? How do I walk them through this story, have them connect with it? But also I want to teach in a way that they're not going, oh, well, he's the pastor, he understands that. I'm like, no, you can get into God's word. It says it right here. Yeah. You can get in and you can do the same exact thing. And so one of my big sides is, man, how do I get people to actually do this for themselves? Like I want them to read the word. I don't want you to ever think like, man, the only time that I really get to understand God's word is when the pastor tells me. That's not biblical. Yeah. At all. Now, we need to come together because I think one of the worst things that can happen is when somebody just goes off on their own and does all their study time alone, never talks to anybody. That's when you end up with crazy ideas because you just kind of, I mean, the weirdest people in the world are people that spend 10 years on a mountain and come down. And that's what we do sometimes is I'll have people come up to me like, I just figured out the secrets of the Bible. I'm like, oh, crap.
Oh, wow.
I don't know what you're about to say, but
bro.
It's not.
Yeah.
Oh, man. I'm like, oh, man.
No one's figured it out, but you did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm like, don't watch that. Don't go to that YouTube link. But, and so it's time and it's purpose. And I'll say this too, and we've talked about this. It is allowing people to rip you apart and being okay with it and seeking it. Because there's a point where people stop giving you feedback. And so you have to seek it out. You have to ask for it. And I grew up with that. My dad is a high feedback individual. I still remember I taught a message on a Saturday night, and we went to Starbucks afterwards, and he goes, that was awful. We're going to rewrite your entire message. And my mom was like, oh my gosh. I was like, no, he needs to walk through this. It's okay. What you did was wrong. It wasn't good. It wasn't good. We're going to figure this out. And it didn't connect. And so it is. And that's the thing. And I think that's why the emails can get you the most is because they write them like you just came up with it that day. Like, oh, you just kind of thought, you know what, today I'll talk about singles, right? Or today I'll talk about boundaries. I never read anything on it, never walked through it. Not that we can't be corrected. Don't get me wrong in that. Not at all. But it's like people come up, they're like, yeah. Anyway, it's interesting. But it is. It's a time, ton of books I've read. One of the greatest, I think I've read probably like 20 to 30 books just on storytelling. Yeah. And then being very purposeful in the people that you listen to, the people that you're watching. And it's not just, I just don't want to watch somebody that's entertaining. I want to watch somebody that prepares people and gets into people's lives and gets them to take next steps. That's the thing. The church is a really easy place to come in, feel good, feel bad, feel convicted, feel awful, feel great, walk out, change nothing. Yeah. And so that's not what we want. We want people to have that conviction, but go, I know my next step to walk out and what I can do.
Yeah, no, that's great. I want to transition and kind of, as we close it out here, talk about men. It's our audience. That's who I speak to on a regular basis. That's who I help and who I coach. Both of you in your stories were talking about the role that your fathers played. Both come from, strong fathers with leadership, pastors' background. I think if we look at the world society right now, we know that there is an epidemic of fatherlessness, and even absent fathers that are present within the home. So it's kind of teeing it up here. Come back to you, Hal. Just, the role that your father kind of played in you, what being a father, has done to you, and just speak to kind of the crisis of fatherlessness right now.
Yeah, I think you don't understand what you had until you grow up.
Wow.
Look back, because it's very easy to look back go, he's just hard. but he would always tell me, he goes, I'm harder on you than your sister because you one day have to be a dad. You one day have to walk through this. And I get that now. And it was. And not everything was done was right or anything like that. But it's like the intention behind it to help me become a man was huge. And then at some point you have to decide, I'm going to be a man. You have to decide, like, this is what I'm going to do with it, because you can hear all the things to just not use it. And so the struggle that happens and what you see early on, and I think that one of the things that is one of the hardest things to see is not everybody had your childhood. Not everybody had the same start that you did. And so the role that we have many times is to help them grow back into it. That's why I love speaking to young adults so often. And I remember one guy coming up to me, he goes, "Why do you speak so hard at men?" I'm like, "Because if you don't hit us with a brick, we don't pay attention. We don't. We're just like, whatever." Like, and because that's the way my dad spoke to me. It was the only way he got through to me. I'm a stubborn person, insanely stubborn person. But if I understand what I'm supposed to do, it's great. Because stubborn in the right direction is great. Stubborn in the wrong direction leads to pain and destruction. And so I think the thing in the church today is it's calling men up. But there's the other side of like helping women understand what men are supposed to be. Because anytime you see masculinity, it's toxic. It's like, no, it's not. No, it's not. It's a great thing. Masculinity that has control, that understands its purpose, is great. And I think that's what the church gives a man is, this is your purpose. This is what it means to be a father. This is what it means to be a spouse. This is how you're supposed to love and care for your wife. This is how you're supposed to care for those around you. Because a man without a purpose is just reckless. I mean, I heard a pastor say this before. He goes, it's like a man is like an old truck. He says, if there's not any weight in the back, it doesn't drive straight. So a man without responsibility is just a man that they go all over the place. It's when you give a man responsibility that he finds his true purpose, where he finds what he's supposed to do. And I think that's one of those things. And we have a lot of men that, and like I'll say it's on both sides. It's where they're not stepping up to the plate. The wife basically nags or takes over, and they just go, okay. And that's one of the worst places to be. And then one of the things I try to do as much as I can in my message, guys, it's not too late. Like, it's not too late. Is it going to be easy to step back into that place? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But you have to. Like, we're called to. And I think even as we're looking at young men coming up, it's like, how do we help this next generation do it better? And one of the things we were talking about before, there's no rite of passage for men anymore. It's like you just kind of step into whatever is next. And there's no, like, when you look over in Africa and all these places, it's like you go out and you hunt something. Like you do something that goes, now I'm a man. Like in the Jewish side, it's the bat mitzvah. And so you have those things, but like we don't have that anymore. It's like, when is it? Is it when I complete college? Is it when I have sex for the first time? Is it like when I have a kid? Like, what does it mean to be a man? And so if no one's explaining that in society, if the church has the ability to step up and do that, it's a force for good. And man, the families that are changed out of that, because that's the thing, man. If we can figure out a way to keep families together, it changes. Good marriage.
Yeah. Well, the stats are what, when a husband comes to Christ, 80% of the time, the wife and the kids follow. We're on the opposite of that. Like if the wife comes first, it's like 3 or 4% of the time the father or the husband.
And I saw it in youth ministry. Was I would have kids whose moms would bring them. They were all about it, but then about the time they hit, like when they could have sex or do other things.
Yeah.
And dad said, "Oh, it's okay to do this." We lost them.
Yep.
And so it was great for a while, but the moment something else came on the plate and dad was okay with it. I mean, I had a dad give his son a subscription to Brazzers to teach his kid about sex. And I'm going, I'm going to tell him something different, but dad is not only giving me the subscription, he's providing me the internet and the place to look at it. And so it's like, man, if dad, and that's the hardest part is at church and even in youth ministry, the hardest part was I can come alongside, but if there's not something else there, and they don't find a fire for it and rebel against that, it's tough.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the lack of initiation, and it's not that now we just have one generation of young boys that are becoming young men that don't have that initiation. We have a generation that is now raising another generation. So this generation didn't have, you and I, same generation, you're a little bit older, but there was an element of an initiation. We weren't raised by technology. We weren't sit down in front of a screen. We had to go outside, broken bones, figure stuff out. So there was that element, maybe it wasn't as official as like some of the tribes and stuff like that, but we have a generation now of young men that didn't have that initiation, don't know what it needs to be a man, that are raising up the next generation of young men. So big question here, Daryl, Hal kind of teed it up, like, what does it mean to even be a man?
Yeah. First, we have to stop letting society define what manhood is and let God define what manhood is. The Bible is riddled with scripture that says, here's what a man looks like. Even if it's not saying hey, a man does this and does this, but it does. A man follows hard after God. A man prays for his family. A man takes care of his family. A man works for his family. All of this is in Scripture. Here's what a man does. This is what I'm calling you to do. And these aren't preferences. This is, if you call yourself a man, if you want to act like a man, these are the responsibilities that come along with those things. So step up to that first. If you're chasing hard after God, God is going to show you everything that you need to do to be the right man. And no one's going to get it perfect. No one's going to get it absolutely all right. Like I talk about my dad a lot, but he got a lot wrong. He did a lot wrong. I think, but one of the best things my father did was he was present. He was there. He never left. He wasn't going anywhere. He was present, and he made it known what I want you to do. And I don't think we have enough men from one generation to know to the next to go, here's what you're supposed to be doing, and here's what I'm going to be passing down. Well, who do we get that from? Because I did a sermon a while back said identity comes from fathers. It's where it comes. Girls get their identities from their fathers. Boys get their identity from their father. Here's who you are. Now that you know who you are, here's what you're supposed to do. Because if you don't know your identity, you'll never know how I'm supposed to perform or what my life is supposed to look like. So men from one generation that you said that you got a generation of men who are teaching another generation of men that don't know anything. There needs to be a generation of men that says, hey guys, here's what we do. First of all, we got to be present. Second, what does God say? Not what does the world say, when you talking about toxic masculinity. There's masculinity, and then there's toxic people.
Yes.
I'm a father of 5. I got 2 boys and 3 girls. My boys are older. This is crazy. And I thought I was raising my boys right. I was doing a lot of stuff that my father was doing. It wasn't until I had my first daughter that I said, I need to raise my boys like I want, like the men I want my daughter to marry. And it changed the way I raised them. And you think you do, because with boys you do everything. It's easy to raise boys. You can just throw meat on the floor and raise yourself. And so I don't think I was as intentional until I had my daughter. And I was like, yo, you gonna like a man one day. And I need to make sure that I'm raising men to be those kind of men for a woman. So it changed my perspective, and it changed the way I raised them. And it changed the way it changed the man that I was, because I had to become a different man to raise them to be different men. And there are things I had to say and things I had to do. Man, I want them to see me praying. And I was praying before, but as an introvert, I'd always prayed in my office, in my car, in my studio. It was always private. Read my Bible. I do that on my own. But when I said, man, I want them to see these things, I became way more intentional. I'm doing it in the kitchen, at the kitchen table. Y'all are doing it with me. We're doing this stuff together. And we need more men to just go, okay, I need to do this stuff. And if you're a man that goes, man, I'm not doing that and I don't know what to do, find a man and go, hey, man, teach me how to do that. And it doesn't take as much time as you think. It just, when you said it before, the hardest part is just starting. I have people ask me all the time, hey, man, where do I start? Hey, man, just read your Bible. Read Proverbs. Just start reading Proverbs. Don't try to break down Leviticus or Numbers. Man, read Proverbs. Read the book of John. Read James. Start small. Read Jude. It's only 2 chapters. Start somewhere. Do it every day. We've talked about the Bible app. Man, there's so many simple ways that you can go, I'm going to make a commitment, and here's what I'm going to do. And watch it change your whole life. There's no substitute for, we talk about community a lot. There's no substitute around being with the right people. And even what you're talking about, when you're talking about people who are porn addicts or sex addictions and all that, dude, you can talk until you're blue in the face until you get community and people that are going to help you walk you through that stuff. Because you can make a personal declaration and go, hey, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to be better. Well, you still live with you.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Those thoughts will still exist tomorrow. And it's not until you get somebody on your team that can go, hey, I know you're going to be thinking about this. You're going to want to do this. Call me. Or we're setting up regular appointments. We're going to do this. Man, I thank God for mentors in my life who held me accountable. I thank God for mentors who go, no, this is what a man does. Tracy and I have been together almost 30 years. I still open the door for her. This is what we do. There's no substitute. This is what we do. And my boys, they still open doors. They still say yes or no, sir. They still do this because I taught it to them, and I want them to teach it to their children. We're going to make this normal. We're going to make chivalry normal. We're going to make being a man normal, doing manly things normal. We're going to go pee in the backyard. We're going to make this normal.
What's bad is when they do it in daylight.
In somebody else's yard.
No, just in my yard, but when everybody else is around.
Right, yeah. It's like you got to do some man stuff, and you need to be around people that can help you, support you in that, and confirm that. So I would say to anybody who's watching at church or wherever you are, get around some men. And you know who the men are. Like, you know who the people who are doing life in a strong way, have a strong connection to God, that you need to go, let me hook up with them. And even if that person is not your mentor, I read this thing the other day that says you can learn how to do anything well in 3 days. So find the person that you want to do what they do, and see if they will allow you to spend 3 days with them. I'm like, I thought about it. I was like, wow, that is. If you spent 3 days with most conferences are 3 days, like the strong ones, 3 days, and they expect you to go away and come up with all this stuff. Yeah. So if I can learn what you do in 3 days, then I can come up with a system to go, okay, here's how I can start walking down that same journey.
Yeah. And that's a challenge for a lot of men is, we're prideful. We have strong egos. Many of us identify as introverts. I got this. I'll figure it out. It's kind of like embedded in the male nature, right? To be the problem solver, to solve those problems. So sometimes when we're having a struggle or we know that we need to make some changes, it's like reaching out for help is oftentimes the toughest step to even take. But once you get that first step out of the way, you get that community, get around the right type of people, it's then things just start kind of falling into place. I think one of the greatest books for any man out there that is struggling is Wild at Heart.
Oh yeah,
by John Eldredge. Like, he sums up what a man is, I think, in the one quote, every man is searching for a journey to go on, a battle to fight, and a beauty to rescue. And kind of talking society right now has kind of hijacked all of that from young men. Video games taking away the need to have a journey or even a fight to go on. It's all kind of this first player point of view games where there's competitive, you're on teams, you're linked up, you're kind of plugged in to the sphere where you're talking with people from all across the globe. And then pornography and Tinder and all that stuff hijacks the need to actually create real intimacy. So as we wrap it up, guys, I would be doing a disservice if I didn't pose this question to the leaders here at church. I deal in the porn addiction space, right? Like, that's what I planted my flag deeply 5 years ago, and that's what we're committed to doing this season of life, is helping guys get out of this. Full transparency, when I started, I looked at the church and I said, they're not really solving the problem. And I think you guys would probably both agree that's not really being handled here within the walls of the church. I think data points a lot to that. 70% of men actively in the church admit to viewing pornography on a regular basis. 75% of pastors will tell you it's one of the biggest issues in their congregation. 56% of divorces will tell you that one person had a compulsive and excessive use of pornography. 56% of pastors that were asked identify as struggling with it, and the number goes higher when you get into youth pastors. Over 60% of youth pastors. So I know we're not going to solve this problem here today, but what do you guys see is the problem with the church not maybe either addressing it or having the tools, resources, information, understanding? Like, what do you think it is that's keeping the church from really being able to handle this?
I think the biggest problem is we see it as just like a regular sin and not an addiction.
Yeah.
Is really what it is. And here's the other side of it. It's really hard, and I think you understand this, like the older generation to understand what the younger generation is walking through. Like, I've had a lot of conversations with pastors. Like, we have to figure out how to allow our younger pastors to get, I have a problem, or our younger staff to say, I have a problem. Because if they saw it at a younger age, the possibility of addiction, I try to explain, I'm like, guys, you don't understand. You could watch this nonstop and still not have the level of addiction that a younger person has, because the first time they saw it was at the age of 10. And so because that went in there. And so I think that's the hard part. And then really, what is where do we send them? One, getting somebody to actually admit that they have a problem. And then two, help them understand, like, no, this is like, because the world doesn't think it's that big of a problem. And we're trying to tell you have an addiction. And so it's it's that big thing. It's like, how do I get somebody that into it? And so and I think accountability helps. I think groups help, all that kind of stuff. But if you don't tackle it like it's a huge problem, like it's not something you fall into, it's something you're addicted to, then you can't solve it. And so it is, and we've talked about this. It's one of my biggest struggles in it, because I feel like there's such a large amount of men that are dealing with it, but what is it? I can't send all of them into one thing at one time. The size church that we are, kind of deal. It's like, how do I deal with this? How do I get people started on this? It's like, how do I take next steps in this? I've even got to a point where I'm like, I'm not going to teach on pornography if I don't have a next step, because I don't want someone to feel a false hope, then go back into it, allow that guilt shame cycle to keep them in that same place over and over again. So I think it is. I think it's a question. I think it's one of those things where I'm going, how do we solve this? How do we walk through this? How do we get young people to understand it's a big enough problem to walk through? Because you told me it's a lot easier to work with people that can lose their family and their wife, but a young person that doesn't have any of that, their loss is not that big. It's not until they meet somebody that they want to fall in love with or whatever, if they even can anymore because of the addiction, that they want to walk towards it. So I think it is. It's one of those big things. It's like, golly, it's so freaking multifaceted. It's like, it is. It's so big, but it's like, we got to start just leaning into it more, talking about it more, being a regular part. I mean, last time I talked about porn, I had an older lady come up to me like, why do you always want to talk about porn? I'm like, because it's what everybody's dealing with. Mm-hmm. You may not. Yeah. But I said, if you looked around, most of these guys do. Yeah. And it's something you deal with even when you're not. I haven't looked at it in a very long time. I still tell people I'm addicted to porn. Why? Because I want to. Absolutely, I want to. It's naked women. Who doesn't? I mean, I guess there's some people that doesn't want to look at that, but like, of course I want to look at it.
Wars have been started.
Right,
I mean,
absolutely.
over naked women. Right?
Yeah. And it's the ultimate drug. It's the ultimate drug. I could feel better in just a moment. And so I have to have things in my house, on my phone, all my stuff, just to go, I don't even want to accidentally slip into that because I understand it. But to get people to that place, to get them from like, oh, it's just something that I do every once in a while, to understanding, no, this is an addiction that can wreck your life, I think is the tough part.
Yeah. I think the age gap, like you said, the older leadership not understanding it, the depth of the problem that it is, realizing that we've really, the drug that we're speaking of is 20 years old, right? The internet has only been around for maybe two decades. So I think changing that, and then opening up the conversation in a safe place where men can be vulnerable and share without the guilt and shame that comes with it. Because that's the first thing is, we can't talk about this, right? Because that taboo, guilt, shame kind of thing now creeps kind of into place. I know this is obviously your zone of expertise, but it is to one extent, right? Because it's ministering to people. Your thoughts just in and around this whole conversation.
You said it already. It is conversation. It is not making it a taboo subject. Yeah. It seems new, but we were talking about this in my church, in my dad's church, when I was 9 and 10 years old. So it's always been around, and there wasn't internet like that, but there were magazines and there were stores and videotapes. And like I saw the first stuff I saw when I was 11 years old. My neighbor across the street, they had boxes and boxes of videotapes and all this stuff. And I just didn't get it. For me, it just didn't resonate for me. Not that I didn't like to see women or whatever. Someone falling into addiction to me didn't resonate. Why are we doing it? And even when I would have friends and we would talk about it, for me, it was always, well, let's talk about it. How are you where you are? Let's what is it? Why are you drawn to it? There's the sexual nature of it, but what's going on in you that's getting you to this point? To me, and I had lined porn addiction up with alcohol addiction. Hey, what got you there? And let's talk about that. Let's just talk about what got you there, because addiction is addiction. Like I actually believe that I have a strong proclivity to be an addict. And so my fear keeps me from doing things, because I'm like, yo, I know me, and I feel like I'd be that guy. So let me just I'm not even going to dabble, because I feel like I would go all in. And so for me, it's always been, how do we keep the conversation open? How do we keep it real? How do we create those safe places? And then how do we also not make the conversation about the subject?
Spot on there.
Make the conversation about the person.
Yeah.
What's the calling? Yeah, this is your addiction, but the addiction could be anything. This is just what you picked. This is just the thing that it is. What's driving you there? The Bible makes it clear. There's 3 issues: lust of the eye, lust of the flesh, and the pride of life. So what is the issue that's driving you to this point? And then let's deal with that. Because I found in my life on those things that I like, that I really want to indulge in, it's like when I really take a step back and go, okay, what's my real issue? Why am I attracted to that? Oh, because you like power. Why are you attracted to that? Because you can create anything you want in any way you want when it comes to that situation. That's why you're drawn to that. Is it a childhood trauma? Is it an issue? Is it whatever those things is? And having people that can call you out, having stuff on your phone, having things that hold you accountable. Because even you can even have stuff on your phone and you can find a way to get around it. and you can have stuff on your phone and you're still not fixing the problem. You may be away from the subject, but you're not fixing the problem, and it'll manifest itself somewhere else.
100%. Yeah, you said it. You said it really clear. You know, porn for most of these guys that are struggling with an addiction has become the Band-Aid. And if you don't address what the wound is and you just replace it with a different Band-Aid, that wound is going to manifest itself in somewhere else. That's where they talk about getting to the root cause of the issues, identifying why that has become the outlet for you. But you hit on the head, man. We've seen it in creative people. You see it in high achievers, high performers, that proclivity to fall into these addictive patterns. If we're not aligned with God, if we're not creatively, fulfilling those passions inside of us. So I appreciate you guys doing that, kind of exploring that there with me. We're in talks with Adam from Clearwater right now, just so you know about what that next step is going to look like, and hopefully having something for the guys here at Grace, and whether that looks like an event, followed up with some action steps, whether it's a program 6-8 weeks long, where that conversation it's been going on for a couple of years. It kind of feels like it's now really beginning to make
and guys
headway.
won. We won when we did the marriage conference last year. We had a couple pastors up talking about their addictions, and the guys who their feedback was like, yo, I didn't know.
Yeah.
I didn't know pastors go through this. Yes.
Yeah.
We're human.
We go through
Well, it's
this
crazy.
too.
Anytime I go on a show or I'm interviewed by somebody, it's like they'll tell me like this conversation is always the most listened to, always the most downloaded, maybe not the most engaged with. Like people want to hear this being talked about. Maybe they don't want to raise their hand or get involved in the conversation.
They want to hear it on YouTube, because I'll tell you this, when we would, at Young Adults, when we would say next week we're talking about porn, half of the room
would just show up.
Half of the room,
Yeah.
because they didn't, but in a safe place.
The
absolutely.
YouTube videos are like 3x
Right.
all the other messages, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So no, this has been awesome, guys. We're gonna wrap it up. We have a last question that we end every single show here. For you guys out there, though, we're gonna have all of Daryl's and Hal's and Grace Family's Church links, the YouTube, the website, both of their IG profiles. Guys, you got to check out some of the sermons from these guys. If you go to the YouTube, search Daryl, search Hal, the messages these guys deliver on a Sunday is why I'm here today. I wanted to explore how they've gotten to these stages, how they've developed and crafted those skills, and introduce you guys to two men that have had a massive impact on me in my life. So last question here, guys. We'll start with you, Daryl. The title of our show is obviously called The Superman Life. This has been a 5-year kind of exploratory journey for me, figuring that out for myself, what living a Superman life means. And I've kind of packaged it into, I believe we're here for a purpose. There's a calling on each and every single one of our lives. I think a lot of people, especially in our circle, would say, yeah, God put me here for a purpose. I think we have to take that, though, and then craft the skill set, be very intentional about our personal development and growth to actually bring that purpose to the world in service of others. So that's how I define it. But Daryl, how would you define living a superhuman life?
Superhuman life is, man, you said what I was going to say. It's taking that first step. I think one of the worst prayers, and we do it. One of the worst prayers that we can often pray is clarity. And I think we always want to know what it's going to be before we start moving. And so one of my favorite passages is in the Bible, in Proverbs and Psalms, where it says he's asking God to order his steps. What he really saying is, God, order my next step. And often God doesn't give you clarity, but he gives you vision. And vision doesn't come with all the details. And so what you really want is that just take the next step. Being intentional, living a human life, for me is this, man, just take the next step. You know what God is calling you to do? Take the next step. And every step you take, he'll reveal the next thing.
Yeah. And your faith will develop and grow.
Yeah.
Hal, bring us home, man.
I
Living a
hate people
superhuman
that
life.
tell, I got a 5-year plan. God gave you that?
Yeah.
Dang, I'm not saying the right thing. Anyway, I would say this, just because you guys have said a lot of it. I would just say this one thing on top of it. Being an introvert, I would say this. The thing that I shied away the most was community and people around me. And people that knew more than me, and I would just try to learn more than them and get above them instead of spending time. The best thing that I have in my life is people that help me, but also the people that call me out. Because if you don't have somebody that will call you out, you're going to go the wrong way. And so it's in that. It's finding your calling, going after it. Absolutely. Like, I think that's one of the biggest things in life. But while you're doing that, get the right people around you that you absolutely trust and give them permission to speak into your life. If you don't have people around you that know they're allowed to speak into your life and they're allowed to speak to your wife and ask questions, you're going to fall into it. And we're all going to fall into it. None of us are that good. We're not. So we need good people.
Yeah. That having the permission, man, that's the key, right? Is like, people actually accepting that and saying, yeah, when they say this, like, I'm going to, and sometimes that's why people have to invest into coaches, right? Because you put some skin in the game, like, you're going to listen. So guys out there, get in the community, but takeaways from this conversation, there's things that are wrestling inside of each and every single one of us. We're being called in a specific way, and we're probably sometimes a little bit resistant to that because the world is telling us something completely different. We got to hear that message. We got to take that first step with trusting God and have the faith, surround ourselves with the right type of people. So appreciate you guys hanging with us here today. Check these two guys out. Check out Grace Family Church. Share this episode though, guys. We've seen some tremendous growth in what we're doing here over the last couple of months, and we're coming up on celebrating 5 years. We're trying to continue to spread this message across the globe. So if you got value out of this, obviously subscribe here on YouTube, rate, review on Apple, Spotify, but more importantly, if there's somebody in your life that needs to hear this message, do us the favor and then the blessing by sharing this conversation. But for Daryl Black, Hal Mayer, the team here at Grace Family, Coach Frank Rich, we love you guys. We'll see you next week.